The dust had settled over the fence line, where Benjamin Turner buried her wedding ring 3 weeks after her husband walked out, and she swore she would never dig it up again. The year was 1883, and the ranch outside Circleville, Utah stretched across 200 acres of red rock country that seemed to bleed into the horizon every sunset. Benjamin had watched her husband, Samuel, pack his saddlebags with the precision of a man who had been planning his escape for months. He had not looked at her when he mounted his horse, had not even glanced back at the house they had built together 4 years prior, when she was barely 20 and he 23. He had simply ridden east toward the railroad, chasing some dream of gold in the Dakota Territory that she knew would swallow him whole. The coward had left her with 30 head of cattle, 2 horses that were getting on in years, a barn that needed repairs before winter, and a silence so complete it rang in her ears like church bells. Benjamin stood now in the early morning light, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold while she stared at the fence that needed mending. She was 24 years old, and the calluses on her palms told the story of every sunrise she had greeted alone since Samuel left. Her dark hair, which she kept braided down her back, was already coming loose, and she pushed the strands away from her face with the back of her hand. The September air carried the first hint of autumn, and she knew she had perhaps 6 weeks before the first snow would make the higher pastures impossible to reach. The cattle were scattered across the eastern range, and she needed to bring them closer to the homestead before the weather turned. She needed to fix the barn roof where the shingles had blown off during the summer storms. She needed to stockpile hay and grain, needed to check the well, needed to do 1,000 things that Samuel had always handled while she managed the house and the garden and the chickens. Now she did everything, and some days she collapsed into bed so exhausted that she did not even dream. She was pouring the cold coffee onto the ground when she heard the sound of hoofbeats coming up the long drive. Benjamin stiffened, her hand moving instinctively to the rifle she kept propped against the porch post. Strangers were not uncommon in this part of Utah, but a woman alone had to be cautious. She had heard stories of drifters and outlaws who preyed on isolated homesteads, and she would be damned if she would let anyone take what she had fought so hard to keep. The rider came into view as he crested the small rise that led to the house. He sat easy in the saddle, his posture relaxed but alert, and even from a distance Benjamin could see that he was tall and lean, built like a man who had spent his entire life working outdoors. He wore a dusty brown hat pulled low over his eyes, and his clothes were the practical garments of a working cowboy, not the flashy attire of a gambler or a con man. As he drew closer, he raised one hand in a gesture of peace, and Benjamin loosened her grip on the rifle but did not set it down. The man reined in his horse about 20 feet from the porch, keeping a respectful distance. He touched the brim of his hat, and when he looked up at her, Benjamin found herself staring into a pair of gray eyes that were the color of storm clouds over the mountains. "Morning, madam," he said, and his voice was deep and rough like gravel rolling in a creek bed. "Name's Quincy Randall. I am looking for work, and I heard in town that you might be in need of a hand." Benjamin studied him carefully. He looked to be in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. There was a scar along his jawline, white against his tan, and his hands on the reins were steady and competent. He did not have the shifty look of a thief, nor the arrogant bearing of a man who thought he could take advantage of a woman alone. Still, she had learned not to trust easily. "Who told you I needed help?" she asked, her voice cool and measured. "Man at the general store," Quincy said. "Said you have been running this place by yourself since your husband left. said you could probably use an extra pair of hands before winter sets in. Benjamin felt a flush of anger and embarrassment heat her cheeks. So the whole town was talking about her, was it? Gossiping about the woman whose husband had abandoned her, the poor thing who could not keep her man happy enough to stay. She set her jaw and met Quincy's eyes squarely. "I am managing just fine on my own," she said. Quincy nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the sagging barn roof, the broken fence rail visible from where he sat, the overgrown weeds that were encroaching on the vegetable garden. When his eyes returned to hers, there was no judgment in them, only a quiet understanding. "I am sure you are," he said. "But managing and thriving are two different things. I am a hard worker, madam. I know cattle and horses, I can mend fences and fix roofs, and I will not cause you any trouble. I will work for room and board and a fair wage when you can afford it. If you do not have the money now, we can settle up when you sell the cattle in the spring." Benjamin wanted to refuse him. She wanted to send him riding back down the drive and prove to everyone in Circleville that she did not need help from anyone. But as she stood there on the porch, feeling the weight of exhaustion in her bones and the knowledge of all the work that lay ahead, she realized that pride was a luxury she could not afford. "There is a bunkhouse behind the barn," she said finally. "It is not much, but it is clean and dry. I will pay you $1 a day plus meals. You work dawn to dusk and you stay out of my personal business. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, madam," Quincy said, and for the first time a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I appreciate the opportunity." Benjamin watched as he rode toward the barn, leading his horse with the easy confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. She told herself that hiring him was a practical decision, nothing more. She needed help, and he needed work. It was a simple business arrangement, and she would not let herself think about the way her heart had stuttered when he smiled at her, or the way his eyes had held hers with an intensity that made her feel seen for the first time in months. By midday, Quincy had settled his few belongings into the bunkhouse and was already working on the fence line that bordered the southern pasture. Benjamin brought him a lunch of bread and cold meat and a jar of water, and he thanked her with a nod before returning to his work. She noticed the way he moved, economical and efficient, wasting no motion. He worked the way a man worked when he had been doing it all his life, when it was as natural as breathing. That evening, she cooked a simple supper of beans and cornbread, and she called Quincy to the house to eat. He washed up at the pump outside and then sat at the kitchen table, his hat in his hands, looking slightly uncomfortable in the domestic space. Benjamin served him a generous portion, and then sat across from him with her own plate. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the scrape of forks against tin plates. Finally, Quincy cleared his throat. "This is real good, madam," he said. "I have been eating my own cooking for the better part of 2 years, and I can tell you, this is a sight better." "You can call me Benjamin," she said, "or Benny if you prefer. I am tired of being called madam. It makes me feel like an old woman." "Benjamin it is," Quincy said, and she thought she saw that hint of a smile again. "That is an unusual name for a woman." "My father wanted a son," she said flatly. "He got me instead, and he figured he would give me a man's name anyway. Maybe he thought it would make me stronger." "Did it work?" Benjamin looked up at him, surprised by the question. There was genuine curiosity in his eyes, not mockery. "I suppose it did," she said. "I learned early on that I could not rely on being delicate or fragile. I had to work as hard as any boy, and I had to be twice as tough to get half the respect." Quincy nodded. "I can respect that," he said. "My mother raised me and my 3 sisters on her own after my father died in the war. She taught us all that strength comes in many forms, and that gender does not determine a person's worth." Benjamin felt something shift inside her chest, a small crack in the wall she had built around herself. She had not expected a drifting cowboy to say something so thoughtful, so true. She took a sip of her water and studied him over the rim of her cup. "What brought you to Circleville?" she asked. "Wandering, mostly," Quincy said. "I have worked ranches from Texas to Montana. I go where the work is, and I move on when it is time. I heard this was good cattle country, and I figured I would see if there were any opportunities." "And what will you do when winter is over?" Benjamin asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Will you move on then?" Quincy met her eyes and something passed between them, something electric and unspoken. "I suppose that depends," he said quietly. "On what?" "On whether there is a reason to stay." Benjamin felt her breath catch in her throat. She looked away, focusing on her plate, suddenly afraid of the feelings that were stirring inside her. It was too soon, too dangerous to let herself feel anything for this man she barely knew. Samuel had left her broken and mistrustful, and she had sworn she would never let another man close enough to hurt her again. But when she dared to glance back at Quincy, she saw in his eyes not deception or manipulation, but an honest longing that mirrored her own. He was lonely too, she realized. He was searching for something, just as she was, and maybe, just maybe, they could find it together. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt almost comfortable. Quincy rose before dawn and worked until the sun set, his presence on the ranch transforming it from a burden Benjamin bore alone into something that felt almost manageable. He repaired the barn roof with efficiency and skill, replacing the damaged shingles and reinforcing the structure so it would withstand the winter snows. He mended every broken fence on the property, riding the perimeter each day to check for weak spots and making repairs as he went. He helped Benjamin move the cattle closer to the homestead, spending long hours in the saddle as they rounded up the scattered herd and drove them into the near pastures. Benjamin found herself watching him when she thought he would not notice. She watched the way he gentled a skittish calf with patience and soft words. She watched the way he removed his hat and wiped his brow when the sun was high, the way his shoulders moved beneath his shirt as he swung a hammer or lifted a bale of hay. She watched the way he smiled at her when she brought him water or coffee, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners and made him look younger and less world-weary. At night, they shared supper at the kitchen table, and their conversations gradually grew longer and more personal. Quincy told her about growing up in Missouri, about the small farm his family had owned and lost after his father died at Shiloh. He told her about learning to cowboy in Texas, about the long cattle drives and the hard men he had worked alongside. He told her about the places he had seen, the mountains and plains and rivers that had shaped him into the man he was. Benjamin, in turn, found herself opening up in ways she had not expected. She told him about her childhood in Salt Lake City, about her mother who had died when she was 12, and her father who had remarried within a year. She told him about meeting Samuel at a church social when she was 19, about how he had seemed so confident and ambitious, so sure that he could carve out a life for them in the Utah Territory. She told him about the early years of their marriage, when things had been good, or at least good enough. And finally, late one evening with the lamp burning low between them, she told him about the slow unraveling, the way Samuel had grown distant and restless, the way he had started talking about leaving, about finding something better somewhere else. "Did you love him?" Quincy asked quietly, and Benjamin was grateful that his voice held no judgment, only genuine curiosity. "I thought I did," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. "But I think maybe what I loved was the idea of him, the idea of having a partner and building something together. When he left, I realized that we had not really been partners for a long time. He made all the decisions and I just followed along. He never asked what I wanted or what I dreamed about. I was just part of his plan, and when the plan changed, I became expendable. That is his loss, Quincy said, and the conviction in his voice made Benjamin look up sharply. Any man who would walk away from you is a fool. Benjamin felt heat rise in her cheeks, and she stood abruptly, gathering the dishes to hide her confusion. She was not used to compliments, not used to being seen as valuable in her own right. Quincy stood as well, reaching out to take the plates from her hands. "Let me help," he said, and together they washed the dishes in comfortable silence, standing side by side at the basin. Their hands brushed occasionally in the soapy water, and each time it happened, Benjamin felt a jolt of awareness that made her pulse quicken. When the dishes were done and put away, Quincy lingered at the door, his hat in his hands. "Thank you for supper," he said, "and for the conversation. It has been a long time since I have had someone to talk to like this." "Me too," Benjamin admitted. "Good night, Quincy." "Good night, Benny." It was the first time he had used the shortened version of her name, and she found that she liked the way it sounded in his rough, gentle voice. October arrived with a cold snap that turned the mornings frosty and painted the scrub oak on the hillsides in shades of orange and red. Benjamin and Quincy worked together to bring in the last of the hay, stacking it in the barn for the winter ahead. They worked in tandem now, anticipating each other's movements, communicating with glances and gestures as much as with words. Benjamin found herself smiling more often, found that the weight she had carried for so long was beginning to lift. One afternoon, as they were herding a few stray cattle back toward the main pasture, Quincy's horse stumbled in a prairie dog hole. The animal went down hard, and Quincy rolled clear just in time to avoid being crushed. Benjamin was off her own horse in an instant, running to where Quincy lay in the dust. "Are you hurt?" she asked urgently, dropping to her knees beside him. Quincy sat up slowly, wincing. "Just my pride," he said, but when he tried to stand, he sucked in a sharp breath and his face went pale. "Let me see," Benjamin said, her hands moving to his left arm. She probed gently, and Quincy hissed in pain. "I think you might have cracked a rib. We need to get you back to the house." Between the two of them, they managed to get Quincy back into the saddle, though every movement clearly pained him. Benjamin led his horse back to the homestead, keeping a careful eye on him the entire way. Once they reached the house, she helped him inside and settled him on the sofa in the small parlor. "I am going to need to wrap your ribs," she said, trying to keep her voice steady and professional. "You will have to remove your shirt." Quincy nodded, and with Benjamin's help, he managed to shrug out of his shirt. She tried not to stare at the lean muscle of his torso, at the scars that told stories of a hard life, at the way his skin was tanned dark on his arms and neck but paler across his chest. She focused on the task at hand, wrapping his ribs with strips of clean cloth, her fingers gentle but firm. "You are good at this," Quincy said through gritted teeth. "I have had practice," Benjamin said. "You learn to be a passable nurse when you are living this far from town." When she was finished, she helped him back into his shirt and then brought him water and a dose of laudanum to help with the pain. Quincy took it gratefully, and within minutes, his eyes were growing heavy. "You should rest," Benjamin said softly. "I will handle the evening chores." "I should be helping," Quincy protested weakly, but Benjamin shook her head. "You have been helping me for weeks," she said. "Let me take care of you for a change." She left him dozing on the sofa and went out to tend to the animals. As she worked, she found herself thinking about the feel of his skin under her hands, the way his breath had hitched when she touched him. She thought about how natural it had felt to care for him, how right it had felt to have him in her house, in her life. That night, She insisted that Quincy stay in the house rather than return to the bunkhouse. She made up a bed for him in the small room off the kitchen that she had once planned to use as a nursery, before she realized that Samuel had no interest in starting a family. Quincy was too weak and sore to argue, and he fell asleep almost as soon as his head touched the pillow. Benjamin lay awake in her own bed, acutely aware that he was just down the hall, that only a thin wall separated them. She listened to the sound of his breathing, the occasional restless movement, and she felt a fierce protectiveness rise up in her. She wanted to keep him safe, wanted to make sure he healed properly. But more than that, she wanted him to stay. She wanted to wake up every morning knowing he would be there, wanted to share her meals and her days and her life with him. The realization terrified her. It was too soon to feel this way, too dangerous to let herself fall for a man who might leave just as Samuel had. But as she lay there in the darkness, she could not deny the truth of her own heart. She was falling in love with Quincy Randall, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Quincy recovered slowly over the next 2 weeks, chafing at the forced inactivity but following Benjamin's orders to rest. She brought him his meals, changed his bandages, and sat with him in the evenings to keep him company. They played cards and read aloud from the few books she owned, and they talked about everything and nothing. One evening, as they sat before the fire, Quincy reached over and took her hand. Benjamin froze, her heart hammering in her chest. "I need to tell you something," Quincy said, his voice serious. "I know I said I was a drifter, that I moved from place to place, and that has been true. But the reason I kept moving was because I was looking for something I could not quite name. A place to belong, maybe. A reason to put down roots." He paused, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "I think I have found it here," he said quietly. "With you. If you will have me, I would like to stay. Not just for the winter, but for good. I want to help you build this ranch into something strong and lasting. I want to be your partner in every sense of the word." Benjamin felt tears prick at her eyes. She wanted to say yes, wanted to throw herself into his arms and tell him that she felt the same way. But the fear held her back, the memory of Samuel's betrayal still too fresh. "How do I know you will not leave?" she whispered. "How do I know you will not wake up one morning and decide that this is not enough, that I am not enough?" Quincy shifted closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "You do not know," he said honestly. "And I cannot promise you that life will be easy or that we will not have hard times. But I can promise you this. I am not Samuel. I see you, Benny. I see how strong you are, how brave and determined and beautiful. I see the way you fight for what is yours, the way you refuse to give up even when everything seems impossible. And I want to stand beside you in that fight. Not in front of you, not behind you, but beside you." Benjamin searched his eyes, looking for any sign of deception or doubt, but all she saw was sincerity and a longing that matched her own. "I am afraid," she admitted. "I know," Quincy said. "I am afraid too, but maybe we can be afraid together." Benjamin felt something break open inside her, something that had been closed and guarded for so long. She leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and kissed him. It was soft and tentative at first, a question more than a statement. But when Quincy's arms came around her, careful of his still healing ribs, and he kissed her back with a passion that took her breath away, Benjamin felt all her walls come tumbling down. They broke apart, both breathing hard, and Benjamin rested her forehead against his. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I want you to stay." Quincy smiled, and it was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. "Then I will stay," he said, "for as long as you will have me." They sat together before the fire, wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time since Samuel had left, Benjamin felt whole. The weeks that followed were a revelation. With Quincy fully healed and back to work, The ranch transformed before Benjamin's eyes. Together, they accomplished in days what would have taken her weeks on her own. They built a new chicken coop to replace the old one that was falling apart. They reinforced the corral and added a second paddock for the horses. They rode out to check on the cattle every few days, making sure the herd was healthy and accounted for. But it was not just the physical work that made the difference. It was the partnership, the sense that they were building something together. Quincy consulted her on every decision, asked her opinion, and listened when she spoke. He treated her as an equal, and in return, Benjamin found herself trusting him in ways she had never trusted Samuel. Their romance bloomed alongside the work, growing deeper and more certain with each passing day. They stole kisses in the barn, held hands across the supper table, and sat together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the red rock cliffs. Quincy courted her with a gentleness and respect that made Benjamin's heart swell, bringing her wildflowers he found on his rides, fixing things around the house before she even asked, and telling her every day in words and actions that she was cherished. In early November, as the first real snow of the season began to fall, Quincy asked Benjamin to marry him. They were standing in the barn, having just finished the evening chores, and the snow was drifting down outside the open door in fat, lazy flakes. Quincy took both of her hands in his gray eyes serious and tender. "I know we have not known each other long," he said, "but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Benny. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you refuse to back down from a challenge. I love the way you laugh and the way you look at me like I am the only man in the world. I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you made the right choice in letting me stay. Will you marry me?" Benjamin felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you, Quincy. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." Quincy pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Benjamin buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "You do not have to be scared anymore," he murmured into her hair. "I have got you. I will always have you." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Circleville. Benjamin wore a dress of deep blue wool that she had sewn herself, and Quincy wore his best suit, which he had borrowed from the general store owner. The congregation was small, just a handful of neighbors and the minister, but Benjamin did not care. All that mattered was the man standing beside her, the man who was promising to love and honor her for the rest of his life. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Quincy kissed her with such tenderness and joy that Benjamin felt her heart might burst. They walked out of the church into the cold December afternoon, and Benjamin felt like she was walking into a new life, one filled with hope and possibility. That night, in the privacy of their home, they consummated their marriage with a passion that left them both breathless and shaken. Quincy was gentle and attentive, taking his time to learn every inch of her body, to discover what made her sigh and shiver. Benjamin gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back, and in his arms, she found a pleasure and connection she had never known existed. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, and Quincy traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Benjamin said, turning to look at him. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for staying." "Thank you for letting me in," Quincy said, kissing her forehead. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, Benny. I am going to spend every day making sure you know that." Winter settled over the ranch in earnest, blanketing the land in snow and ice. But inside the house, there was warmth and laughter and love. Benjamin and Quincy worked together to care for the animals, to keep the fires burning, to make sure they had enough supplies to last until spring. They spent the long evenings playing games, reading and making love, and Benjamin marveled at how different this winter was from the one she had feared facing alone. In late January, Benjamin realized that she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was just the stress and hard work, but when another week passed and she began to feel queasy in the mornings, she knew. She was pregnant. She told Quincy one evening after supper, her hands trembling as she took his and placed them on her still flat belly. "I think we are going to have a baby," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Quincy stared at her for a long moment, his eyes wide with shock. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of joy that startled the dog sleeping by the fire. "A baby," he said, pulling her into his arms and spinning her around. "We are going to have a baby. Oh, Benny, this is the most wonderful news." Benjamin laughed and clung to him, relief flooding through her. She had not been sure how he would react, had worried that it was too soon, that he might feel trapped. But there was nothing but pure joy in his face, and she felt her own happiness expand to match his. "Are you sure you are ready for this?" she asked when he finally set her down. "It will change everything." "I am ready for anything as long as I have you," Quincy said, cupping her face in his hands. "We are going to be a family, Benny, a real family, and I am going to be the best father I can be to our child." Benjamin believed him. She believed in him, in them, in the life they were building together. The winter gave way to spring, and with the warmer weather came new energy and optimism. Benjamin's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Quincy hovered over her like a mother hen, insisting that she not overdo it, that she rest and take care of herself. Benjamin tolerated his fussing with good humor, secretly pleased by how much he cared. They planted a larger garden that spring, knowing they would need the extra food with a baby on the way. They repaired and painted the nursery, turning it into a bright, cheerful space with a handmade cradle that Quincy had spent weeks crafting in the barn. They talked about names and plans and dreams for the future, their conversations always circling back to the wonder of the new life growing inside Benjamin. In late May, they made the difficult decision to sell half the cattle herd. The money would give them a cushion for the coming year, would allow them to hire help if needed and to buy the things they would need for the baby. Quincy handled the sale with skill and shrewd negotiation, getting a fair price from a cattle buyer out of Salt Lake City. When he came home with the money, he placed it in Benjamin's hands. "This is ours," he said. "What do you think we should do with it?" Benjamin appreciated that he asked, that he truly saw it as their money, not his alone to manage. "Let us put half in the bank for emergencies," she said, "and use the rest to improve the ranch. We need a new well closer to the house, and we could use another draft horse. And maybe we could afford to hire someone for a few weeks when the baby comes, just to help with the heavy work." Quincy nodded. "That sounds like a solid plan." "You are a wise woman, Benny Randall." Benjamin smiled at the sound of her new name. She had officially become Benny Randall in the eyes of the law and the community, and it felt right in a way her married name with Samuel never had. Summer arrived hot and bright, and Benjamin grew round and uncomfortable. Quincy was unfailingly patient and attentive, rubbing her swollen feet, bringing her cold water, and making sure she stayed out of the worst heat. He took over the heaviest of the ranch work, though he still consulted her on everything and made sure she felt involved in all the decisions. In mid-August, as the summer heat reached its peak, Benjamin went into labor. It started in the early hours of the morning, a tightening in her belly that gradually grew more intense. She woke Quincy, and he immediately went into action, sending for the midwife in town and preparing the bedroom. The labor was long and hard, lasting well into the next day. Quincy stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow and murmuring encouragement. When Benjamin felt like she could not go on, when the pain became too much to bear, it was his voice that anchored her, his strength that gave her the will to keep pushing. Finally, as the sun was beginning to set on the second day, their baby was born. The midwife placed the squalling infant in Benjamin's arms, and she looked down through tears of exhaustion and joy at the most beautiful sight she had ever seen. "It is a boy," the midwife announced with a smile. Quincy leaned over Benjamin's shoulder, his own eyes wet with tears, and touched their son's tiny hand. The baby immediately grasped his finger, and Quincy let out a choked laugh. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Benny. Thank you for giving me this." They named him Thomas, after Quincy's father, and he was indeed perfect. He had a shock of dark hair like his father and his mother's determined chin. He cried lustily when he was hungry and slept peacefully when he was content, and both Benjamin and Quincy fell completely in love with him. The first months of Thomas's life were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Benjamin had never known she could love something as much as she loved her son, and watching Quincy with the baby made her fall even more deeply in love with her husband. He was gentle and patient with Thomas, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with him when he was fussy, and singing him lullabies in his rough voice that somehow always soothed the baby. Quincy had hired a young man from town, a 19-year-old named Peter who was eager to learn the ranching trade. Peter lived in the bunkhouse and handled much of the daily work, allowing Quincy to spend more time with Benjamin and Thomas. It was the right decision, and it gave them the breathing room they needed as new parents. As the months passed, and Thomas grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, smiling baby, the ranch continued to thrive. With Peter's help and Quincy's leadership, they expanded the herd and improved the property. They added a second barn and a smokehouse, and they planted an orchard of apple and cherry trees that would bear fruit in years to come. Benjamin found her rhythm as a mother and a rancher's wife, learning to balance the needs of her child with the demands of the land. It was not always easy, and there were days when she was so tired she could barely stand. But every time she looked at Quincy, every time she held Thomas in her arms, she knew that all the hard work was worth it. On their first wedding anniversary, Quincy surprised her by bringing home a beautiful mare from a breeder in Panguitch. The horse was young and spirited, with a coat the color of burnished copper and intelligent eyes. "She is yours," Quincy said, leading the mare over to where Benjamin stood holding Thomas on her hip. "I know you have been riding that old gelding for years, and you deserve something better, something that is just yours." Benjamin was speechless. She handed Thomas to Quincy and approached the mare slowly, running her hand down the horse's neck. The animal nickered softly and pressed her nose into Benjamin's palm. "She is beautiful," Benjamin said, her voice thick with emotion. "What is her name?" "That is up to you," Quincy said. "She is your horse. You get to name her." Benjamin thought for a moment, looking into the mare's warm brown eyes. "Liberty," she said. "Her name is Liberty," Quincy smiled. "That is perfect." That evening, after Thomas was asleep and Peter had retired to the bunkhouse, Benjamin and Quincy sat on the porch, watching the stars come out over the desert. Benjamin leaned against her husband, feeling his arm around her shoulders, and she thought about how much her life had changed in a single year. "You ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Settling down, giving up the drifting life?" Quincy turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Not for a single second," he said. "This right here with you and Thomas, this is everything I ever wanted, even when I did not know it. You saved me, Benny. You gave me a home and a family and a reason to wake up every morning with purpose. How could I ever regret that?" Benjamin kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. "You saved me too," she whispered against his lips. "I was drowning when you showed up, and I did not even know it. You taught me what it means to be truly loved, to be seen and valued for who I am. You gave me back my life." "Then we saved each other," Quincy said, pulling her closer. "And we will keep saving each other every day for the rest of our lives." The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Thomas grew into a sturdy, adventurous toddler who followed his father everywhere, his chubby legs pumping to keep up with Quincy's long strides. When Thomas was 3, Benjamin gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Charlotte. She was a quiet, contemplative baby who seemed to observe everything with serious dark eyes. With 2 children and an expanding ranch, life was busier than ever. But it was also richer and more fulfilling than Benjamin had ever imagined possible. She and Quincy worked as a true team, supporting each other through the challenges and celebrating the victories together. Peter had become like a younger brother to them, a permanent fixture on the ranch who had learned the trade well and become an invaluable hand. When he turned 22, he married a girl from town, and Benjamin and Quincy gave them a small parcel of land on the edge of the property to build their own homestead. It felt right to share their success with someone who had been so loyal and hardworking. By the time Thomas was 5 and Charlotte was 2, the ranch had become one of the most successful in the Circleville area. They had 100 head of cattle, a dozen horses, and a reputation for quality stock and honest dealing. Quincy had become a respected member of the community, serving on the town council and helping to mediate disputes between ranchers. Benjamin had earned her own reputation as a savvy businesswoman and a skilled horse trainer, and Liberty had become the foundation of a small breeding program that was beginning to turn a profit. But for all their success, what mattered most to Benjamin was the family they had built. On Sunday afternoons, when the work was done, they would pack a picnic and ride out to a favorite spot by the creek. Thomas would splash in the water while Charlotte picked wildflowers, and Benjamin and Quincy would sit together on a blanket, watching their children play. "Can you believe this is our life?" Benjamin said one such afternoon, her head resting on Quincy's shoulder. "Sometimes I have to pinch myself," Quincy admitted. "I still cannot quite believe that you chose me, that you let me into your life." "I chose well," Benjamin said, turning to kiss his cheek. "We both did." That evening, as they rode back to the ranch, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and gold behind them, Benjamin thought about the day Quincy had ridden up to her porch, a drifting cowboy looking for work. She thought about how close she had come to sending him away, to letting her pride and her fear keep her alone. She was so grateful that she had taken the chance, that she had let him in. Because in doing so, she had not only saved the ranch, but she had also found something far more valuable. She had found love, real and deep and lasting. She had found a partner who cherished her and a family that filled her heart to overflowing. As they approached the house, Thomas riding in front of Quincy and Charlotte drowsing in Benjamin's arms, she looked over at her husband. He caught her eye and smiled, that same smile that had made her heart stutter the first time she saw it. "I love you," she mouthed silently. "I love you too," he mouthed back. And in that moment, with the ranch spread out before them and their children safe in their arms, Benjamin knew that she had everything she would ever need. She had built a life from the ashes of her old one, had turned heartbreak into hope and loneliness into love. Samuel had left her with nothing but an empty house and a struggling ranch, but from that emptiness, she had created something beautiful. And when Quincy had shown up and offered his help, He had given her more than just his labor. He had given her his heart, his loyalty, and his unwavering belief in her strength. Together, they had transformed the ranch from a burden into a legacy, from a place of sorrow into a home filled with laughter and love. And as Benjamin tucked Charlotte into her bed that night and listened to Quincy reading Thomas a bedtime story in the next room, she knew that this was the life she was meant to live. The scars of the past would always be there, a reminder of how far she had come. But they no longer defined her. She was not the woman Samuel had left behind, broken and alone. She was Benny Randall, wife to Quincy, mother to Thomas and Charlotte, rancher and horsewoman and survivor, and she was happy. Years continued to unfold in a pattern of hard work and deep satisfaction. When Thomas was 7 and Charlotte was 4, Benjamin gave birth to their third child, another boy they named William after Quincy's grandfather. William was an easy baby who rarely cried and seemed content to watch the world with calm curiosity. Thomas immediately took on the role of protective older brother, and Charlotte was delighted to no longer be the youngest. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They had expanded their holdings by purchasing the neighboring property when the elderly couple who owned it decided to move back east to be near their children. The additional acreage gave them room to increase the herd and to experiment with breeding different strains of cattle. Quincy had a natural eye for quality stock, and his choices proved sound, resulting in healthy calves that commanded top prices at market. Benjamin's horse breeding program had also flourished. Liberty had produced 3 beautiful foals, and Benjamin had carefully selected complementary stallions to breed her with, creating a line of horses known for their intelligence, stamina, and even temperaments. She had buyers from as far away as Denver inquiring about her horses, and she took great pride in placing her animals with people she trusted to treat them well. But even with all their success, Benjamin and Quincy never lost sight of what mattered most. They made sure to spend time with each of their children every day, to listen to their stories and answer their questions and help them navigate the challenges of growing up. They taught Thomas to rope and ride, to mend fences and doctor sick animals. They taught Charlotte to garden and cook and care for the chickens, though she showed more interest in following her father around the ranch than in traditional domestic tasks. And they held William close, savoring his baby years, knowing how quickly time passed. On quiet evenings, after the children were in bed, Benjamin and Quincy still sat together on the porch, talking about their day and making plans for the future. They still held hands and stole kisses when they thought no one was looking. They still made love with the same passion and tenderness that had marked their early days together, their connection deepening with each passing year. One spring evening when Thomas was 10, Charlotte was 7, and William was 3, a rider came up the long drive to the house. Benjamin and Quincy were in the yard, watching the children play, and they both tensed at the sight of the stranger. But as the man drew closer, Benjamin felt her stomach drop. It was Samuel. He looked older, thinner, weathered by hard living. His clothes were shabby, and his horse was a sorry-looking creature that had clearly seen better days. He dismounted slowly, and Benjamin saw him wince as his feet hit the ground. "Hello, Benny," he said, and his voice was hoarse, defeated. Quincy stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Benjamin, his body language protective but not aggressive. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice cool. Samuel glanced at Quincy, then back at Benjamin. "I heard you were doing well," he said. "Heard you remarried, had a family. I just wanted to see for myself, I guess." "You have no right to be here," Benjamin said, finding her voice. It was steadier than she expected, though her heart was hammering in her chest. "You left. You gave up any claim to this place to me when you rode away." "I know," Samuel said, and for the first time she saw genuine remorse in his eyes. "I made a mistake, Benny. The biggest mistake of my life. I thought there was something better out there, thought I could strike it rich and come back a successful man, but all I found was failure and regret." "That is not my problem," Benjamin said firmly. She felt Quincy's hand on her lower back, steadying her, supporting her. "I grieved for the man I thought you were, and then I moved on. I built a life, a real life, with a man who knows the meaning of commitment and partnership. You need to leave." Samuel looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him taking in the changes. She was no longer the uncertain young woman he had left behind. She stood tall and confident, with a husband beside her and children playing in the yard. She had everything, and he had nothing. "I can see you are happy," he said quietly. "I am glad for you, truly. You deserved better than what I gave you." He climbed back on his horse, moving slowly, painfully. Before he rode away, he looked at Quincy. "Take care of her," he said. "She is worth more than I ever realized." "I know exactly what she is worth," Quincy said quietly. "And I thank God every day that she chose to give me a chance." They watched Samuel ride away, his figure growing smaller until he disappeared over the rise. Benjamin let out a breath she had not realized she was holding, and Quincy turned to her, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Benjamin thought about it, examining her feelings honestly. She had expected to feel anger or pain at seeing Samuel again, expected old wounds to reopen. But all she felt was a kind of distant pity for the man he had become, and an overwhelming gratitude for the life she had now. "I am more than all right," she said, turning to face Quincy fully. "Seeing him just made me realize how lucky I am, how lucky we are. He could have stayed, could have been part of building this life, but he chose to leave. And his leaving brought you to me. If I could go back and change things, I would not, because then I might not have you. I might not have our children. I might not have this life that I love with all my heart." Quincy pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "You are the strongest woman I have ever known," he murmured into her hair, "and I am the luckiest man alive." That night, after the children were asleep, they lay together in their bed, and Benjamin told Quincy everything she remembered about her marriage to Samuel. She had shared bits and pieces over the years, but she had never told him the full story, had never opened up completely about that chapter of her life. Now, with Samuel's ghost finally laid to rest, she felt free to speak about it honestly. Quincy listened without judgment, holding her hand and letting her talk until there were no more words left. When she was finished, he kissed her forehead and pulled her close. "Thank you for trusting me with that," he said. "And thank you for letting me love you, even when you were scared. I promise you, Benny, I will never give you reason to doubt me. You and our children are my whole world." "I know," Benjamin said, and she meant it. She trusted Quincy completely in a way she had never trusted Samuel. Their marriage was built on honesty and mutual respect, on shared labor and shared dreams. It was everything a partnership should be. The years marched on, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. They weathered droughts and hard winters, illness and accidents, the normal trials of life on a ranch in the harsh Utah territory. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. Thomas grew into a capable young man with his father's easy confidence and his mother's determination. At 18, he was already managing much of the ranch work, and he had a natural gift for leadership that made Benjamin proud. Charlotte, at 15, had developed into a skilled horsewoman who could outride most of the men in the county. She had her mother's eye for horses and her father's patience, and she worked alongside Benjamin in the breeding program, learning everything she could. William, at 11, was the scholar of the family, always with a book in his hand. though he never shirked his chores. He talked about becoming a veterinarian someday, and Benjamin and Quincy encouraged his dreams. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Quincy surprised Benjamin with a trip to Salt Lake City. They left the children in Thomas's capable care, with Peter and his wife nearby to help if needed, and they took the train north for a week away from the ranch. It was the first time they had been alone together, truly alone, since their honeymoon. They stayed in a hotel with actual wallpaper and gas lamps, ate in restaurants where other people did the cooking, and spent their days exploring the growing city. They went to the theater and held hands in the dark like young sweethearts. They walked through the gardens and talked about everything and nothing. And at night, in the privacy of their hotel room, they rediscovered each other with the passion of newlyweds and the knowledge of long-time lovers. On their last evening in the city, as they sat in the hotel restaurant over a dinner of steak and potatoes, Quincy reached across the table and took Benjamin's hand. "I have been thinking," he said, "about the future, about what we want the ranch to look like in 10, 20 years. "And what do you see?" Benjamin asked, intrigued. "I see Thomas taking over the cattle operation eventually, with us there to guide him but letting him make his own decisions. I see Charlotte building the horse program into something even bigger than it already is. I see William coming back from veterinary school and setting up a practice on the ranch, caring for not just our animals but the livestock of all the ranchers in the area." "That is a beautiful vision," Benjamin said softly. "But more than that," Quincy continued, "I see us growing old together. I see us as grandparents, playing with our grandchildren and passing down the stories of how we built this life. I see us sitting on that porch when we are old and gray, still holding hands, still in love." Benjamin felt tears prick at her eyes. "I see that too," she said. "And I cannot wait to live it with you." They returned to the ranch refreshed and reconnected, ready to face whatever came next. And what came next was more life, more love, more of the beautiful ordinary moments that made up a well-lived existence. Thomas did indeed take over management of the cattle operation when he was 21, and he proved to be every bit as capable as Quincy had predicted. He married at 23, wedding a schoolteacher from Panguitch named Sarah, and they had their first child, a son named after Quincy, within the year. Becoming grandparents brought a new dimension of joy to Benjamin and Quincy's life, and they doted on little Quincy Jr. with unabashed delight. Charlotte, determined and independent, insisted on attending an agricultural college in Colorado to learn more about scientific breeding practices. It was unusual for a woman, but Benjamin and Quincy supported her ambition, and she returned 2 years later with a wealth of knowledge that she immediately put to use. She transformed the horse program into one of the most respected in the region, and she remained unmarried by choice, declaring that she had no time for romance when there were foals to raise and bloodlines to perfect. William did go to veterinary school, just as he had dreamed, and he returned to Circleville at 24 with his degree, and a quiet confidence that made people trust him instantly. He married a rancher's daughter from the next valley over, and they built a house on the edge of the ranch property, close enough to be part of the family but far enough to have their own space. As Benjamin and Quincy moved into their 50s, they gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, trusting their children and Peter to handle the work. They still rode out every day, still checked on the animals and walked the property, but they no longer carried the weight of total responsibility. It was a relief and a blessing to see their legacy in good hands. On a warm summer evening when Benjamin was 54 and Quincy 58, they sat on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. But this time, they were surrounded by family. Thomas and Sarah were there with their 3 children. Charlotte sat on the porch railing, bouncing her youngest nephew on her knee. William and his wife Helen had brought their twin daughters, who were playing in the yard with their cousins. Peter and his family had been invited for supper, and the house was full of laughter and conversation. Benjamin looked around at all of them, at this family they had built, and she felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. Quincy must have sensed her emotion because he reached over and squeezed her hand. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. "I am thinking about that day you rode up to the house," Benjamin said. "How scared I was, how alone I felt, how close I came to sending you away." "What changed your mind?" Quincy asked, though they had talked about this before. It had become one of their favorite stories, the tale of how they found each other. "I looked in your eyes," Benjamin said, "and I saw something honest there, something real. And I thought to myself, maybe I do not have to do this alone. Maybe it is okay to accept help, to let someone in." "Best decision you ever made," Quincy teased gently, and Benjamin laughed. "Second best," she corrected. "The best decision was saying yes when you asked me to marry you." "I love you, Benny Randall," Quincy said, lifting her hand to his lips and kissing it. "I have loved you from the first moment I saw you standing on that porch with a rifle in your hands and fire in your eyes, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Benjamin said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me everything. A home, a family, a partnership that has been the foundation of my life. You saw me when I felt invisible, and you stayed when everyone else had left. You are my heart, Quincy. You always have been." They sat together as the sun set, painting the red rock cliffs in shades of amber and rose, and they watched their family, their legacy, play and laugh together. The ranch that Benjamin had fought so hard to save, that Quincy had helped her build into something strong and lasting, stretched out before them in the fading light. It was not the life Benjamin had imagined when she was a young bride married to Samuel. It was better. It was real and hard-won, and built on a foundation of genuine love and respect. Every fence post, every barn beam, every acre told the story of their partnership, of 2 people who had found each other in the midst of heartbreak and had chosen to build something beautiful together. As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge overhead, the family gradually dispersed to their own homes, calling goodbyes and promises to return soon. Benjamin and Quincy were left alone on the porch, just as they had been so many nights before. "Do you remember what you said to me the night you proposed?" Benjamin asked, her head resting on Quincy's shoulder. "I said a lot of things that night," Quincy said with a smile. "You said you wanted to stand beside me," Benjamin reminded him. "Not in front of me, not behind me, but beside me. And you have done that every single day since. You kept your promise, Quincy. You have been my partner in every sense of the word." "It was an easy promise to keep," Quincy said. "Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle in the distance, the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods by the creek, the soft nickering of horses in the barn. These were the sounds of home, of a life well lived, of a love that had endured. Benjamin thought about all the years that stretched behind them, all the challenges they had faced and overcome together. She thought about the children they had raised, who were now raising children of their own. She thought about the ranch that had nearly broken her, but had instead become her greatest source of pride and joy. And she thought about the man beside her, the drifting cowboy who had shown up looking for work and had stayed to build a life. Quincy had given her everything, but more than that, he had helped her discover her own strength. He had believed in her when she had stopped believing in herself, and together they had created something that would last long after they were gone. "Thank you," she whispered, so quietly she was not sure he would hear. "For what?" Quincy asked, turning to look at her in the darkness. "For everything," Benjamin said simply. "For finding me, for staying, for loving me, for giving me this life." Quincy cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle and familiar after all these years. "Benny, my love," he said softly, "you have nothing to thank me for. Every good thing in my life came from you. You took a chance on a lonely drifter, and you gave him a reason to settle down, to put down roots, to become the man he was meant to be. If there is any thanking to be done, it should be me thanking you." Benjamin kissed him, a long, slow kiss that held 20 years of love and partnership and shared dreams. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "Then let us just call it even," she said, "and agree that we are both the luckiest people alive." "Deal," Quincy said, and he pulled her close again, holding her as the night deepened around them. They sat together on the porch, two souls who had found each other in the unlikeliest of circumstances and had built a love that would stand the test of time. The ranch was quiet now, the work done for another day, but it would all begin again tomorrow. The cattle would need tending, the horses would need feeding, the land would make its endless demands. But Benjamin was not afraid of the work anymore. She never had to face it alone. Quincy would be there beside her, just as he had promised, just as he had always been. Together, they would continue to build their life, to nurture their family, to watch their grandchildren grow and eventually have children of their own. The story that had begun with heartbreak and abandonment had transformed into a tale of resilience and redemption. Benjamin had taken the broken pieces of her first marriage and built something new and beautiful from the ruins. And when Quincy had appeared, offering his help, he had given her not just his labor but his heart, his loyalty, and his unwavering love. Now, as they sat together under the vast Utah sky, surrounded by the land they loved and the family they had created, they knew that every hardship, every challenge, every moment of doubt had been worth it. This was their legacy, not just the ranch but the love they had built, the family they had raised, and the example they had set for their children of what a true partnership could be. The story of Benjamin Turner Randall and Quincy Randall was a story of the Wild West, but it was also a timeless story of love conquering fear, of two people choosing each other every day, and of building a life that mattered. It was a story that would be told and retold by their children and grandchildren for generations to come, a reminder that even in the hardest times, love could flourish and hope could triumph. And as the moon rose over the red rock cliffs, casting its silver light across the ranch they had built together, Benjamin and Quincy Randall sat hand in hand, their hearts full, their love undiminished by time, and their future as bright and promising as the stars overhead. They had found their happily ever after, not in some fairy tale land, but in the dusty, beautiful, challenging reality of a ranch in the Utah Territory, where hard work and true love had combined to create something extraordinary. This was their story, and it was complete.